Hey guys, Gus here, and today I'm going to be taking on the daunting task of reviewing the entire Minitaire paint range from Badger Airbrush Co. These paints were very kindly sent to me by the chaps over there. Ken, who runs the company, sent these out to me very kindly, and I apologise to Ken because it has been a while since he sent these to me, but there's a reason for that, because I've literally gone through every single paint in this range, every single ghost tint, and every single sort of additional product, such as the satin wash, the satin varnish, gloss varnish, paint retarder, etc. So I've gone through it all. As you can see in front of you, I've grouped the paints into their rough sort of color groups. Now, the first thing to say with this range is that for airbrushing, it is overall, I would say it's a good range. I wouldn't say it's excellent, I wouldn't say that it's outstanding, I would say it's a good range, way above average, of course. But it does have some problems. However, with those problems, there are some exceptional paints in the range, and there are some paints that do have some issues. So let's start with left to right. The first thing I'd like to chat about is the purples. Now the purples I would regard as sort of average in the range. The pink is slightly thinner, and the other two purples, the slightly darker and slightly lighter one, the Etchy Mose and the sorry, I can't remember the names, and Demonic Skin, they're kind of average, and the pink is quite thin, and that's absolutely fine because generally you're going to be using pink as a highlight anyway, so they're okay. The yellows, sorry, and with the purples, they generally spray out of the actual out of the airbrush without too many dramas. You know, you just have to do the usual maintenance kind of stuff. The yellow range has got one really odd color in it, and this color is called irradiated yellow, and it's I mean, if don't look at these paints and look at the actual bottles. Look at the colors on top, as I've done, because that's obviously how they dry, right? And you can see just how thin this paint actually is. It's very, very, very thin. So it's the kind of paint that you would use after, for example, doing a grayscale miniature. So you'd paint, you know, literally black to white with greys in between, and then you'd spray this over the top. So you'd almost use this like a ghost tint, even though it is not a ghost tint. But we'll come on to those in a second. The rest of the yellows are okay. They spray okay. A couple of them are a bit thick. The mustard gas, and I believe it's the Craven. The mustard gas and the Craven, they come out a bit thick, so they would need a bit of thinning before shooting them out of your airbrush. Because the problem is as soon as it starts to clog your airbrush up, then all the admin and the maintenance, and you got to strip the thing down and clean it and blah 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 blah, and then you got to go for it again. Then there's the skin range. Now, out of all of them, I would say the skin range is the second most consistent out of the lot. It's a good range, and there's some very, very interesting colors, especially if you look at whereabouts is it? Things like Earth, and also Mummy. I believe Mummy's actually in the Rotten Wood. Yeah, Mummy. Things like Mummy and Rotten Wood can be used for flesh as well, and they're both great colors. But the actual skin range is very consistent, and it's a good range. Maybe you'll require thinning with a few of the colors, such as the old the amber. A little bit of thinning required with that one, as well as citrus. Yeah, citrus orange can sometimes be a bit of a drama as well. So, but the skin range is good. In my opinion, the best range that they do are the Grayscale range. This range is freaking brilliant. The whites from the greys, from the blacks, they're extremely consistent. They all give the same sort of finish on the model, and they're just really good, really consistent range. They spray well. You can just literally whack them right into your airbrush, and you don't have a problem with them. I really, really like the fact that Raven Black is not completely black. It's sort of this off dark bluey, real deep black color, but it's not pure black, and it's a great base coat, absolutely fantastic. They also do coal, which is a nice one as well. So their grayscales, I think, in my opinion at least, are one of their strongest sort of sets within the Minitaire paint range. The browns, I had a lot of problems with browns, especially the darker colors. They tended to be very thick right out of the pot, and they tended to clog the airbrush up quite a lot and quite consistently. In fact, I had to stop and clean a lot with this range. The exception is the lighter colors, of course. The lighter colors such as your Ancient Bone, and as before, things like Rotten Wood, and this is a great color as well, Desolated Beach, and I believe where is Bark? Bark is here somewhere. Rotten Wood, Cracked Soil's another great one. So they've got some really great colors. It's when you're dealing with the darker browns, things such as your not jaundice, things such as jaundice, things such as your cracked leather, and things such as your muddy brown. That's when I started to have some dramas with the brown paints. So brown paints, a bit mixed, but you can get away with them. The main problem I find with Minitaire is thinning them down. You have to do it outside of the airbrush before you pour it in. You can't pour in the paint and then thin it down inside the actual gravity-fed cup at the top. Simply because the heavier paint already settles and filters into the nozzle while you're trying to thin it, so you end up clogging it up anyway. So you got to thin and then pour it in. Their metallic range, while I've heard a lot of negative things about their metallic range, I think their metallic range is fantastic. They have really unique metallic colors, and a great example of this is if you go back and watch my Imperial Night video. I used the gun alloy color, and it's this kind of like bluey metallic color. It's very unique and it's great looking, and that actually goes for all of the metallic paints. The metallic paints are really great. Again, across the range of them, across the 6 metallic paints I've got in front of me here, they're all very consistent and they're all very unique metallic colors, which I really like. Going over to the blue range is good. And the reason the blue range is good is because, as you can see in front of you, there's very sort of logical progressions in color. That's what I like about it. You can go dark blue to light blue to X, Y, and Z. It's quite consistent. There are a couple that are quite thin, like if you look at the Troll Hide, which is a little bit thin, as well as Royal Blood. You can see it's a bit of an odd color, but the blues are good. I like the blues. They're great. One of my favorite groups of paint are the reds. There are just some red colors you do not get anywhere else. Prime example is, here it is, my favorite, Angelic Blood. What a color. This color is freaking awesome. It is like, if you've ever seen the pictures of the old samurais and that sort of red lamellar samurai armor, that's that color. And I've not actually seen it in any other range, and it's a really unique, really great color. And they do some of the very interesting stuff as well. They do like a pumpkin. There we are. You want to paint pumpkins? You've got pumpkins, you know, and shit. So there's some really great colors in here. I mean, you've got innards as well. Now, the thing to note with these colors is, as you can see, what I've done on the lids is, you know, obviously I've got all the paints out and painted them on the lids. What you can do is use the thinner ones for airbrushing and then use the thicker ones for brushwork. So again, like innards, you know, it's a thicker color that you can use for brushwork. Whereas going back to the yellows, if you tried to use irradiated yellow for brushwork, you'd probably have to do about 250 coats before you actually got the frickin' color down. But the reds are nice. And again, they've got that sort of natural progression in colors, which I like. The green range have got some, again, very unique colors, but the majority of them are kind of your bog standard colors. So you imagine like Dark Angels green and Catachan green from like the Games Workshop range, which is fine. You know, that's okay. That works. And there are a few unique ones thrown in there. Like they've got this boring green, which I don't think it's very boring. I think that's actually a really cool color. I mean, it's a very unique green. But the greens are like a bog standard green range, and for the most part, with one or two unique colors. So they're a good solid bunch of paints. This is where things get interesting. When you start talking about the ghost tints, now I've heard ghost tints described in all sorts of ways. They are something. You'll notice that on the top of the bottles I've put down a little bit of masking tape, and I've put the colour down, and on some of them, I don't know if you can make it out here, I've written a little I, and on some of them I've written a little W. And what I mean by this is an ink and a wash. Now if you remember back to the days of inks, when companies still used to make inks, that is the way that they behave. So if you expect to, do for example, a grayscale miniature from black to white, and then spray a ghost tint over it, if it's one of the ones that's more like an ink, you are going to oversaturate. It's going to be too much. It's not like a wash. But the thing is, though, is it's not like I've labeled them I and W. It's not, these are like inks and these are like washes. Some of them are a bit of an in-between. So it's really a case of experimenting with the ghost tints, playing around with them, having little practices on spare bits of plastic and what have you, and getting used to them, because they are quite tricky. And one of the things I find with ghost tints is, I mean, if you look at like one of the slightly thinner ones here, let me go for, yeah, I mean, if you look how thin that is, and you go, oh yeah, great, I can just blast that all over a miniature. Well, guess what? You can't, because if you do, you're going to oversaturate your miniature. So, instead of just going for it with a bunch of coats, it's literally just spray one coat and let it go kind of thing. Because of course, as paint is being aerosolized, it's drying at the same time. So you're not getting that wash effect. So applying these with a brush may be more beneficial than applying them with an airbrush. Just a thought. So then we come on to the sort of accessory type of things, which is the gloss coat, flat coat, and also satin. These I find a bit of an issue, because I normally coat with satin. That's my normal thing. I've tried flat coat, satin coat, and gloss coat, of course, with this paint range. The problem is depending on what sort of spraying distance you are from your miniature, and the amount you retract the nozzle and open the aperture depends on the effect you get. So they're not consistent. That's the problem with these. If you applied them by brush, it's way better. So applying them with airbrush I find to be inconsistent. So you might end up with like the top half of your miniature looking gloss and the other half looking sort of flat, even using the flat coat. So they're a bit odd. And I find, just get a big brush, put some of this on your palette, whack them on. Bob's your uncle, funny's your aunt. All good. Then they've got a drying retarder. Now, I may be being a bit of an idiot here, but I don't really see the point of a drying retarder with an airbrush, because generally drying retarders are used when you want to do things like wet blending. Now, I don't know, unless somebody's some sort of like airbrush guru, I don't think you can do wet blending with an airbrush. That'd be pretty difficult to do. Unless you've got two separate airbrushes, of course, then maybe you could pull it off. But the drying retarder, of course, you could use it if you're applying things with brush with the thicker paints in the range. Great, fine. There we go, it's something they do. Now, onto a couple of gripes with the range in general is the actual paint bottles themselves. Now, the problem with these paint bottles is that they are not completely transparent. They are slightly opaque paint bottles. They're not completely see-through. And this is an issue. And this is why, again, why I've had to put the actual paints on the top of each, excuse me, on the top of each paint bottle, because the bottles are opaque, and I think that that's a bad idea, because you can't really see and judge, exactly what your paints look like. So that's the thing I don't like. The bottles themselves, the flip top lids, are kind of a double-edged sword. They're quick, they flip up, you can whack them in your airbrush, close the lid, and you're good to go. The problem with them is they do tend to leak. So what I mean by that is when you're pouring them, you put a few drops into whatever you're putting your drops into. As you turn it up, you tend to get leakage out of the top, and then because the lid flips back down, it kind of spurts paint out, which can be a bit of an issue. It's not too much of a train smash, who cares? The bigger problem really is the opaque paint bottles. That said, the shape of the paint bottles is great, especially for storing on paint racks. They store really, really well, which is nice. You know, even standing up, they store well. Not like. I mean, who the fuck designed that shape? It's just stupid, isn't it? This is way more logical. So they store great. So overall, I think that it is a good paint range. It's a solid paint range, but I do think that it is a paint range that is not particularly consistent overall, and it's a paint range that you do need to get used to, and you do need to experiment with. But once you experiment and you get used to it, I think you will get very, very good results with this paint range. Where would I start if I was buying these paints? I'd probably start going with grayscales, and then adding in a few extra, you know, the essential colors like 2 reds and 2 blues and 2 greens and that sort of thing. And you know what it's like with paints, and then you build your collection up from that. And then maybe a ghost tint or 2, just to kind of experiment with the paints. And in fact, what they do is they do a little 12 paint box set, as you can see these where the ghost tints are stored, that come with a nice spread of colors, which is a really great place to start. And I think they give you a ghost tint, a metallic, couple of reds, couple of blues, greens, etc. like that. And that's a really great place to start with this paint range. So overall, decent paint range. I hope you've gotten something out of the video. I hope that this has given you an indication and a sort of heads up on what kind of paints you would like to be using, both in brushwork and, if you are that way inclined, doing airbrush work. Please like, subscribe, and post comments below, guys. I'd like to hear your opinions. So take care.